In this video, I'm going to talk about my 30 years of property investing. I'm going to talk about my very best deal, my worst deals, my biggest regrets, some mistakes I've made, what I do differently, and how you can learn and become a far more successful investor and achieve far more than I did much quicker than I've done it. So this month marks the 30th anniversary of my very first property back in 1995. Like most people, I bought a property just to live in, and I rented out some of the rooms to my friends who were still at university, so I became an instant live-in landlord. And I only became a proper landlord maybe 3 years later in 1998, when I moved out of my first house into a second home closer to where I was working at Cadbury's, and I rented the first one out to a group of students at Birmingham University. Now, if you want to get into property, here's a first big tip for you. Getting your own home is a really good start, getting a foot on the ladder. But if you can get a property bigger than you need for yourself, you can potentially rent out some of the rooms. There's actually a government scheme called the Rent a Room Scheme, where you can make £7,500 of rental income and pay no tax on that at all. And that really will help to contribute to your mortgage payment, make it more affordable for you to live. And I was effectively living rent-free because I had 2 tenants and it was covering the mortgage and pretty much most of the bills, which is how I was able to save most of my salary and some money from my part-time business promoting nightclubs in order to buy my second property, in which I had to put quite a big deposit. So getting onto the housing ladder, I think, is a really good thing if you want to be successfully investing in property. However, many of my students, they might be living at home, they've got some money, and they actually buy an investment property before they actually buy their own home. Regardless, whichever you do, I highly recommend you get onto the property investment ladder, because that's one of my biggest regrets. You see, I was busy with my full-time job at Cadbury's. I had my part-time job running student nightclub events in Birmingham, and that was a great business, good fun, good cash generator, and I used that money to invest in property. However, property was very much a part-time activity. I was dabbling in property. It was a bit like a hobby. And one of my big tips for this video is, if you want to invest in property, you need to treat it like a business. It doesn't have to be full-time. You can become very successful just part-time investing in property, but the time you do have available, you've got to treat it like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, it will probably cost you money like a hobby. Treat it like a business, it's going to make you money like a business. And I wish I had someone like me telling me this when I first started, because I took way too long to build up my property portfolio. Many of my students now on my year-long mastermind program, they build up a portfolio in a year or 2 that's sufficient to replace their income, and it took me 8 years to do because I was doing it on my own. So another big tip is, don't try and invest on your own. The more successful you get as a property investor, the fewer people around you can help you because they won't understand what you're doing. When I left my job at Cadbury's, all of my friends were still working. My family, although they had their own homes, didn't really have investment properties. No one I knew really understood property. And that's why in 2003, I set up the Property Investors Network. From self-interest, first of all, just trying to meet other people like me who I could learn from. Because although I'd done all right, I'd replaced my salary, I'd left my job, I knew I'd made some mistakes. And I knew by learning from other people, I could go forward much quicker. So surround yourself with like-minded people and learn from other people. It's a smart thing to do rather than trying to learn it yourself. Now, by the way, obviously this YouTube channel should be a great resource for you. Please like this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to get notified anytime we bring out a timely video. So I do encourage you to do that. And I've got lots of great videos to work your way through that will teach you some of the best strategies and how you should be investing right now in the property market. That leads me on to my next point. There are some decisions I've made over the 30 years that probably weren't great decisions. And let me give you a little context to that. So I've done a number of property deals that were no money down. In 2006, I learned all about working with motivated sellers. Now, this was a new concept to me. I'd been investing 11 years, I'd replaced my income, and I'd probably stumbled across a couple of motivated sellers by accident. But I learned about deliberately looking for these people who've got problems, not to take advantage, but to try and help them, to come up with an ethical win-win solution. You see, there are people who've got property and they've got a problem, and they see selling that property as a solution to that problem. Now, I only want to buy the property if it really is the right thing for them to do, because that's probably their most valuable asset. But some people, they don't want the property for whatever reason. And if we can help them and give them certainty and speed, then actually the amount of money they get for that might not be the most important thing. They might sell at a discount, or they might be flexible in the terms, which means they're flexible about when they get paid. So I learned that when you buy properties below market value, at the time, we could do what's called a same-day remortgage. So we buy the property for cash, borrowed from someone else, and then we would remortgage it the same day, pay back the person we borrowed the cash from, or we'd end up with a property, no money down, no money left in, and a positive cash flow. And sometimes we'd have a tenant from day one as well. That seems like an incredible deal. However, and here's the next lesson, just because something seems like a good deal, just because something's a no money down deal, that doesn't mean you should necessarily do it. What happened very often, those properties, the tenants might have eventually moved on and the properties needed a bit of a refurb. And at that particular time, 2006, 2007, the property market was booming. And actually, even though we bought property below market value, the market value was probably inflated. The market was booming, surveyors were overvaluing things, banks were giving finance to people on a self-certification basis. You just signed to say you could afford it, and this is one of the reasons why the global financial crisis happened, because banks were lending money to people who really shouldn't be borrowing money. Mainly homeowners who couldn't afford to pay it, but they just had to sign to say they could afford to pay, self-certification, and then when the banks realized they had all this toxic debt, all these mortgages that would never be paid back, that's what caused the global financial crisis, initially in America, and then it rippled around the world. Northern Rock was the first company that had difficulty in late 2007, and that was the start of the financial crisis where many of the big banks, you might remember, were bailed out by the government. Now, I was actually investing during the property market crash in 2008 and 2009. My book, Property Magic, had just come out in 2008, and I was proudly talking about this way you could buy property using literally none of your own money. A couple of months later, that particular lender ceased that way of doing it as the global financial crisis kicked in, and that particular chapter in Property Magic was redundant. Now, I'm pleased to say the rest of the book was pretty good. We pretty quickly brought out an updated edition, and it's currently in its 6th edition. Later this year, we will have a 7th edition of Property Magic. And obviously, it's been a pretty good book because we've had over 100,000 copies bought. It's probably the best read property book in the UK. So if you haven't read Property Magic, I highly recommend you go and check it out. And in fact, if you have read it, maybe go back and read it again, because I think you'll pick up things you missed the first time round. So one of my regrets is buying properties. They seem like a good deal because there were no money down. And the lesson for me is I should have done more research. I should have done more due diligence to make sure that if the current tenant moved out, was it still a good rental property? And this is where really I came up with my 5 golden rules in my book Property Magic, because I'd been investing by that point for about 12 years. I was teaching other people for about 4 years, and I noticed that I and many other people were making the same mistakes. And often it came down to due diligence. It was buying deals that maybe weren't such good deals. And so the 5 golden rules help overcome that. And it's a guideline to help people minimize the risk and maximize the return. In case you don't know what the 5 golden rules are, very, very quickly, golden rule number 1, we want to buy from motivated sellers. Golden rule number 2 is we only buy in a property in an area of strong rental demand. Golden rule number 3, we must buy property that gives us positive cash flow. That means at the end of the month, we take the rent, that's all the bills, there must be money left over. Golden rule number 4 is we buy for long term, which means we don't worry about short-term fluctuations. And golden rule number 5, we want to have a little bit of a cash buffer to make sure if there's a problem, we can get it fixed, get the property rented to make sure it's generating cash for us. So using the 5 golden rules will dramatically minimize your risks and maximize your return. One of my other regrets, as well as not doing it quick enough and taking it seriously, as well as not doing enough research, is I bought a number of apartments. And again, many of these were nice and easy. And I see investors make the mistake even now. They buy an apartment because it seems like an easy hands-off investment. Low maintenance, tenants quite like living in new apartments. The problem with new apartments is you're generally paying a high overinflated price. Even though you're allegedly buying at a discount, you're paying a premium for that property. What that means is it takes a long time for the value of that property to go up. And probably some of my worst deals were deals that cost me no money to initially buy. There were no money down these. They seemed like a great idea, but because they're apartments, because I bought them at the peak of the market, even though they gave cash flow, they didn't have the capital growth. In the UK, typically we see property prices on average double every 10 years. And certainly over the last 30 years, I've seen properties that have doubled, and doubled again. So I know that absolutely happens, but not on all of my properties. And generally apartments are ones that have not performed as well. So generally I'm now reluctant to do apartments, obviously except London where most of the properties are apartments. But I found with apartments, for the reason I mentioned before, you're often paying a high price, but also there are service charges and you have a management company look after the property and sometimes they don't do such a good job and the service charges can massively eat into your profit. That's why I prefer freehold houses as generally a better investment. One of my very best deals I've done was a property that I didn't find myself. Someone in my network passed it to me. It was actually in London. It was a masonette property, a 4-bedroom property. And I don't really invest in London, but this was passed to me. I spoke to the seller. They'd been let down and they were in a real situation and I just wanted to help them. I gave them some advice and I actually suggested that he didn't sell the property. It was a really good property. I said, look, here's what you can do to get out of your problem. I gave some advice. They were incredibly grateful. And what I did was kept in touch with that seller. This is a big tip, a big lesson. Most property investors, they speak to a seller, they get a deal or not, generally not, and then they just forget about it. Where really you need to keep in touch with that seller because that motivated seller might become more motivated over time. Now this particular person, it was a good property. I told them, I said, if I was you, I wouldn't sell. I gave them some advice to prevent them getting repossessed, kept in touch. And later on down the line, they decided they did want to sell and they came back to me because I'd actually helped them, because I'd really given them some great advice. And so when they came back to me, they were prepared to sell it at a big discount. They'd bought it years before at a much lower rate, so they're still making money on it. They just wanted to get rid of this property. That property was a 27% discounted property in SE20, which is an area called Penge in London. Now, at that time, all my money was tied up in other property deals, but I really wanted to do this deal. I thought it was a really good buy. So I worked with a joint venture partner, someone with whom I worked. It was actually a private lender. I borrowed money from them, I'd pay them back, they knew me, they trusted me, and I said, look, I've got a great opportunity here, do you want a joint venture on it? I've got the deal, I'll do the work, you just put the money in. So we put the property into their name, and this was actually before Section 24 came in. It was still a good idea to put properties into personal names. 2 years later, that property had gone from a value of 225, we bought it for 162 by the way, it had gone up to 400,000. We sold it 400,000. In 2 years, we each made over £100,000 profit. So that was a deal. I didn't even find myself. I didn't actually buy it first. I just gave the seller some really good help and advice. And then I used someone else's money to fund the deal. So that's a kind of a unicorn deal. Doesn't happen all the time, but that's probably one of my best deals. One of the other things I've done since about 2010, I've done a number of commercial to residential conversions. I've converted 3 care homes into blocks of apartments. I've taken a youth centre to turn into 20 apartments. I've taken a pub to convert into an 11-bed guest house and a number of houses to convert into blocks of flats. Now, I've always had partners who've done the building side. That's not my expertise. And development can make really good chunks of cash. However, my experience is it doesn't give you cash flow. So if you're new to property investing, probably doing development is not what you should start with. By all means, at some point in your property journey, do development, but it's probably not the best thing because it's not going to give you cash flow. And over 22 years of helping other people to invest in property, the vast majority of people who I help are people who want to gain cash flow, either to replace the income from the job they don't like, or maybe they love what they do, they just want to put a safety net in place in case something happens to them and they can't actually work. And when COVID came in 2020, that was a massive wake-up call for many people who maybe had a great job or running good business, and suddenly that income disappeared. And it was a real wake-up call to say, look, one source of income is not enough income for you. You want to have these multiple sources of income. People often ask me, for my 30 years of investing experience, what is the very best property strategy? Personally, I like HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, where you rent out individual rooms to individual people on separate contracts. They can be more work, they can be more effort. However, I don't manage the properties myself. I employ really good letting agents, specialists who look after HMOs to look after properties for me. Now, obviously, I give some of the rental income to them, but I don't have the hassle. I wouldn't really want to be managing those properties myself because they are more work. You also need to understand about things like licensing and Article 4, and this uncertainty puts a lot of buyers off, but that's good because it means there's less competition. Having said that, a lot of people realize how HMOs are a good strategy, and in most areas there is an oversupply of HMOs. So why am I suggesting you should do HMOs if there's an oversupply? Well, really, you want to make sure you're doing what's called high-end co-living. So these are not the average HMOs. In fact, do not do average HMOs because there is an oversupply. In any property investing, you want to make sure your property is better than the average stock available, which means you will rent your property quicker and you'll get a higher rent and you'll probably have lower void periods. A void period is when between tenants. So if you have good quality property, and you should look after your property, you should look after your tenants because they are your paying clients who come back every month to buy your product. So look after your property, look after your tenants, and that's how you become a good landlord. With the Renters' Rights Bill coming, as we know, there's a lot more regulation and you need to make sure you're up to speed, you know exactly what's happening, because unfortunately there will be some professional bad tenants who try and take advantage of landlords who don't know what they're doing, and ignorance is not an excuse. And most tenants are absolutely fine, they just want somewhere decent to live, they're prepared to pay a fair rent, but there are a small number of professional bad tenants who know exactly what their rights are, and unfortunately this Renters' Rights Bill is going to give those people more power. And this is one of the reasons why we're seeing more and more landlords are selling up, they're getting out of the property game. And people often say to me, is it really worth it, Simon? You know, interest rates are higher than they were for the last decade. We've got the Renters' Rights Bill coming. Is it still worth investing in property? And my answer is, as long as you educate yourself and do your research, is a resounding yes, because there's still this huge demand for rental accommodation in the UK. There's just not enough places for people to live, and so we are providing a valuable service for those people who can't afford to buy their own home, or maybe don't want to buy their own home for various reasons. So be a good landlord, look after your property, look after your tenants, and as long as you know what the regulation is and you do the right things, you don't have anything to worry about. Is it as good investing now as it was 20 years ago? No, probably not. But 20 years ago, there wasn't YouTube, and most people weren't aware of property investing. Now there's no excuse for not knowing exactly how to invest. And I do hope you enjoy this YouTube channel, all the videos here for you. If you get serious about investing, you might want to think about coming to join one of our paid training courses. I give away so much valuable information on this YouTube channel. I really do hope you enjoy these videos. But you know what? When you invest in yourself and come into a course and the information laid out from step by step by step, it's going to save you a huge amount of time rather than having to watch hours and hours of YouTube videos. And also, by being in a group of other people also going through the training, it gives you confidence and belief that you can do this. And also, networking, connecting with other people is a really good idea, because the bigger your network, the bigger your net worth. People you meet in your industry are people who can help you. They could give you deals like that deal I got in London. I didn't find it, someone in my network passed me that deal. The person who funded that deal was someone in my network. So something for you to concentrate on if you want to be a successful, not just property investor, but business person, is build your network. Meet people, connect with them, follow up with them, and always try and leave relationship in a positive, friendly way if you possibly can. Sometimes people fall out, but don't hold grudges, don't be bitter, because it's amazing how you meet people in another walk of life. So always try and have a positive outlook, and if things don't go well, try and part in the best possible terms. So I hope it's been useful, some of my lessons. Just to recap some of my things, I don't really like buying apartments anymore. I much rather buy houses. Development is something you should do at some point in your property journey, but not if you're starting out. make sure you do your due diligence, make sure you educate yourself and invest in yourself to reduce the amount of time to learn how to be a successful investor. Those are some of my tips. I do hope that helps you, and here's looking forward to the next 30 years of property investing. As ever, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill.